Remember the Tiger Who Came to Tea? It's a children's book written in the 60s, which most honestly defined my childhood. Today, I'm bringing you a much darker story, a Soviet family who met a tragic end after living with 2 lions in their apartment. Lev Berberov, his wife Nina, and their 2 children, Eva and Roma, lived in Soviet Baku, which is now the capital of Azerbaijan. Lev was a lover of animals. He kept all sorts: cats, dogs, parrots, raccoons, and he even had a wolf and a puma living in his apartment at one time. In the summer of 1970, Nina and Eva went to the zoo, where in the corner of one of the enclosures they saw a pitiful, grey, rolled-up ball. As told by Nina, "My daughter said to me, 'Mummy, look, there's a little dog dying in there.' To which she replied, 'Darling, it's not a dog, it's a baby lion, the king of the beasts. It must be ill.' Nina then begged the zoo director to let the family take the cub home, and amazingly, they let them. The cub soon became a family favourite, and they called him King. His temperament was described as peaceful and noble, and within 1 year he had transformed from a small, scruffy cub into a full-grown animal with a big, shaggy head of hair. The family loved King. They coddled him with water bottles and fed him with a feeding bottle. In the beginning, the little cub's forepaws did not function at all. They took turns massaging him for days. Gradually, the lion started walking, but with this physical defect that stayed with him for life. The family friend who visited them often said, King was a really kind animal. Once he could walk, he behaved similar to an ordinary cat. The only problem was that he was fond of licking guests. His tongue was really like sandpaper. If you hushed him a little, he would run away to his nest on the corner or on the top shelf. Not everyone was starstruck by King, however. The neighbours were living in constant fear and anxiety, and for good reason. Neighbour Alexander Kovrenko complained in the early 1970s, "I would return home from work, but I couldn't get any peace and quiet. I couldn't sleep either. The lion roared so loudly that the dishes rattled. Sometimes the lion would throw himself against the wall and roar, and plaster would come off our wall from the impact. But the worst thing was the smell and the fur. The stench was so bad that I felt like throwing up all the time." The lion did also have a bit of a jealousy streak, as described by Nina. "The young lion loved her husband a lot, and he treated me gently as a woman. But at some point, other feelings towards me were aroused in the animal. He started to sleep between us on our bed and was often pushing my husband out of the bed. I think he was jealous. Sometimes, when he got bored alone, he would come into our bedroom with my husband, climb on the bed, push me or Lev off it, lie on his back with his stomach, and fall deep into a sound sleep. In the morning, I woke up with everyone, had breakfast, and played with the children. They dragged him by his moustache, rode him like a horse. They could do anything with him. He was not offended or anything and never snapped." King did manage to get a walk in the local park every morning, but otherwise lazed around the apartment. He was locked in with stainless steel nets being attached to the balcony to prevent him from escaping from the second floor apartment. He obviously attracted a lot of attention from the press, who wrote numerous articles and TV programs. Journalists came from all over the Soviet Union on a daily basis to see and take photos of the lion at the dinner table and lying in his bed. A series of photographs were published showing Roman, the son, plaiting his mane, and King sleeping on a pillow covered in a blanket. King's fame migrated to the big screen. He featured in a movie, The Girl, the Boy and the Lion, and was invited to take part in a comedy called The Incredible Adventures of Italians in Russia in 1973. The family started to make money, got heaps of meat for free, and earned some kind of celebrity status. They rubbed shoulders with movie stars and directors and moved to Moscow. But King was a terrible actor. He had never been trained and couldn't follow the simplest of commands, and the actors on set feared him. The lion was untrained, ignorant, and in my opinion, stupid. Difficult relations developed with his trainers. Using the slightest excuse or no excuse at all, they would declare, "The lion is ill, the lion can't do this, the lion is tired." For example, after King had run 20 meters, they would say, "The lion is overworked, so there'll be no more filming today." It was their way of extorting more money from the movie's production manager, who hated the whole menagerie. Recall the director of the comedy, Eldar Raznov. To all complaints, Lev's response was that this was a unique experiment in the domestication of wild animals. The local branch of the Communist Party took to this explanation and, on instruction from the first security of the Communist Party in Azerbaijan, who later became president in 1993, a truck arrived on a daily basis bringing free meat for the king. King continued to be visited and loved by members of Moscow's Intelligensia and was once taken to a sanatorium for sick children in Pedorelenko. The children were delighted and petting him, peering into his eyes and pulled on his tail. Later on in that day, King was put on a bus, taken to the dacha from the famous children's author Yuri Yakovlev. The words "Hello King" were emblazoned on the fence of the dacha, and all the residents of the settlement came to meet the lion. Whilst the lion's owners, together with the owners of the dacha and their guests, feasted at the table and pronounced toasts in his honour, King was lying under a tree in the garden, playing with Chap, who was the family's Skye Terrier. That day, the dog was the only living creature who understood the lion and brightened up his proud loneliness. Fyodor Rezidov wrote in his book The Memoirs of Spent Stars, extinguished at their height of fame. These were to be King's last days. During the filming of Unbelievable Adventures of the Italians, the berberovs were placed in a school building as a temporary residence. Every morning, police used loudspeakers to warn residents of nearby buildings not to approach the area because the school was inhabited by lions. Some people, overcome by their curiosity, would ignore that warning. On July the 24th, King was playing football in a school gym with an assistant. The windows of the gym looked out onto an apple orchard, and being a hot day, they weren't properly closed. Assistant Alex at some point stopped playing the game and went home, leaving King alone. There are a couple of differing stories of what happened next, but I'll go with the one that I read in Russia Beyond. At the same time, a young couple were walking their dog by the school. The dog crawled through a hole in the school fence and wandered over to the gym windows. Vladimir, the pet's owner, went over the fence to retrieve the dog. With his back to the school, he didn't see King coming, and the animal pounced on him. He was found pinning the young man down with his entire 240 kilograms of weight. Markov, disfigured by claw and tooth marks, was about to have his head bitten off. Passers-by called the police, and first on the scene, Alex Gorov aimed and fired. The first to run up was the owner of the killer beast, followed by her husband, and they started yelling at me. "Fascist bastard," typical Soviet reality, and nearby lay a lad in a pool of blood. They were paying no attention to the poor wretch. I was gobsmacked and couldn't work it out. Haven't I just saved a man? Is how Gorov himself recalls the events. Markov had survived. His encounter with the lion had resulted in mild shock and a loss of a lot of blood. But for the berberovs, King's death was a real tragedy. The family even demanded that Gorov be jailed for killing the lion, since they were convinced that Markov himself had provoked the animal to attack him. Nina's own version of the incident was that, according to witnesses, Markov started pulling faces and jumping around, one moment facing the lion and then turning his back on him. King saw it as an invitation to play. It was how our assistant had rehearsed the scene for Italians with him, for an episode where the lion runs after someone and pulls him to the ground. The lieutenant heard the shouting, ran up to the fence, and without working out what was happening, fired at King. The lion immediately stepped away from the young man and moved into the direction of the broken window, but Gorov seemed to have got carried away and emptied his whole magazine at King. The attempts to have the policeman jailed were unsuccessful. Gorov continued his internal affairs ministry career. The family buried King at the writer's dacha in Berberovs and returned to Baku, Azerbaijan. We were all very upset and tearful, but Chap, the family dog, grieved most of all. Chap, who suffered from a pre-coronary condition, died the next day. I was against the second lion, but my husband insisted on having a new lion in our family, said Nina Berberova. According to her, King 2 was purchased and presented to the berberovs by members of the Moscow Intelligensia to console them. Our new family member was different from King 1. We saved the life of King 1, and therefore he was kind to us. But King 2 is more demanding and independent, recalled Nina. He loved Rome the most. He was very attached to Roma and immediately fulfilled all his requirements. Roma climbed on his back and rode him like a horse, but he was not obedient. During shooting a film about the family's life, the director tried to force King into jumping into a cold river. King retaliated with rage, biting his leg and left an 8-centimetre wound on his thigh. In 1978, tragedy struck again when Lev died from a heart attack. Nina was left alone in the apartment with 2 children, the lion, and other animals, including a puma, Layla. Nina came home to find Layla huddled in the corner of a room and a strange smell lingering in the apartment. Out on the balcony, King Two was being tormented by a neighbour who was lighting a plastic comb and throwing it at the lion. She shooed the neighbour away and set about feeding her son and lion, but King Two was really distressed. He hurled himself at Nina, flattening her. Roma, the poor child, tried to run away, but King killed him on the spot, breaking his neck. Nina came to with the police shooting inside the apartment, killing King and Layla. She tried to save Roman, but he very sadly died the next day. Nina was brought back to health by her daughter, but gave up on raising wild animals and never forgave herself for the death of her son. What a tragic end to the story. I'm so sorry to that poor boy who lost his life in such a tragic way. I can't believe anyone thought it would be a good idea to live with a lion, but maybe I'm just ignorant. I've had many a story of people keeping wild animals as pets. I'm not sure how often it ends well or badly like it did in this case. The most interesting stories I've heard is of Escobar's Komodo dragons and hippos, which have actually taken over and become like a pest in Colombia. It's really difficult to like manage the population because they don't have any predators. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode and I hope you found it interesting despite the tragic end. But yeah, thanks for being here and I'll see you next time.